All right, so now we're going to take a look at the use list Pokemon hook, which is the hook that's used here to actually list all of these Pokemon. This one, as we can tell straight away, it's a lot more difficult to convert this one to TypeScript. So let's start by just renaming our file here from JavaScript to TypeScript, and we're immediately going to be bombarded by one error. So let's just ignore this for the time being because we're going to work our way backwards to try and solve this. So first, let's try and think about what data is. And once we figure out what data is, we're going to be able to use this function here and properly use our state. Because the reason we're saying this error first and foremost is because if we look at list Pokemon, it's an array of never. So if we try to set anything in there, we're going to have a problem. Now, how do we figure out what data is? One way you could do that is by running the app and taking a look at the response and comparing that against the type definition file that we have. Another thing we could do is something very similar where we just go ahead and look at the documentation for the API. So if we go to the Pokemon API documentation, API v2, we scroll down here. So what endpoint are we using? We're using /API v2/Pokemon. And the first thing in the list here is actually resource lists, which sounds very similar to what we're doing. For example, /API/v2/ability. And the response we get from that is a named API resource list, which is of type list of named API resource. So let's see if we can find that in the type definition file. So let's go to another place where we've used that. It's this Pokedex promise v2 type definition file we're talking about here. And if we can scroll down, we can see the second interface and the fourth interface, we've got that named API resource list and that named API resource. So if we think about what we're doing here, and we look back at the documentation, this endpoint here, we just happen to be using Pokemon, returns a named API resource list. So what I'm going to first do is add our generic here, named API resource list, which is going to throw an error because we need to first import it, but also because generic requires one type argument. And if we look here, we're using a generic. And I'll be honest with you, this is a bit of a tough and confusing one. I don't know why they've set it up this way, but if we look at the results here, so we supply a generic here and we pass that to named API resource. So if we go to named API resource, take the generic, we pass it to the API resource URL. We come up here and T extends string. So it's not super clear where this flows from. Sometimes you're going to find some weird type definition files, but if this extends a string, then I think we can be reasonably confident that we can supply a generic of a string here and everything's going to be all right. If you didn't find that out on your own, that's okay. When you fail and make those mistakes, that's where you're going to learn the most anyway. Perfect. So now we've added the correct type for data there. So we know we're getting this named API resource list, which has a result on it. And what are we doing here? So this is a little bit hard to parse. You're going to have to sit down and really look at it. But we're taking the current state, we're spreading that, and then we're appending on the next set of results that we get. So we're accessing data.results. If we go back to our type definition here, property results is of type named API resource. So that tells me also that here we're using an array of named API resource, which also accepts that same generic as before, which we'll just go ahead and supply a string again. Perfect. And you can tell once we've added that in, all of the type errors are correct. So we've got our named API resource there. We're spreading it, and then we're getting data.results, which is also the named API resource. So that was a tough one. Certainly didn't expect you to get all the way through without some help, but hopefully this gave you some experience and gave you some more tools about what to think about when you're converting JavaScript to TypeScript.